This is Law with Charlie, hosted by Charlie Medcalf. This is your podcast and YouTube channel for all things law, legal academia, and qualifying as a barrister.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Law with Charlie with me, Charlie Medcalf. And today we're going to be looking at employment law, and in particular we're going to be introducing the concept of the reconciliation of work and family life. And this is essentially about how we can balance work life with family life. And so let's get straight into it, and I will give you just a bit of a taste of what I will be talking about in this podcast episode. I will start by explaining the importance of reconciliation of work and family life, what the justifications are for these laws in this area, as well as describe the psychological justifications for shared childcare. And so this bit is a very unique aspect of what I'll be talking about, and isn't necessarily law. These psychological justifications are not really the key things which are in the minds of policymakers, although as someone who did A-level psychology, I am a firm believer that psychology is important and it should play a role in how policymakers implement new policies and laws. And once we've described the psychological justifications for shared childcare, we shall explain the development of family-friendly rights in the UK. So see where we started off and have a bit of a taste of where we are now. So what is actually meant by reconciliation of work and family life? So this is a relatively new area of law, and it's only been in recent years, and it was highly influenced by EU policy as well. And it allows couples to essentially reconcile childcare responsibilities with employment. And as I mentioned, it was introduced and led mainly by the European Union, the EU, in order to get women contributing to the economy following pregnancy. And so there's obviously that classic idea that the man was the bread maker, the woman was the homemaker, and ladies, particularly after pregnancy, would then be stay-at-home mums and looking after the children, doing the housework and doing the cooking. But as I'm sure you are well aware, times have changed significantly now. And so this reconciliation of work and family life is largely all about helping to share childcare and responsibilities which were previously agreed privately between mother and father. And so this gives both the mother and the father, or it could be two mothers, or it could be two fathers, the opportunity to equally have a large play a large part in a new child's life. And so, as I mentioned, this was previously agreed privately between the mother and father, although now, with the rules which are in place for the reconciliation of work and family life, there's more employment support, i.e. there's different types of leave and different kinds of incentives to encourage both partners to take time off to care for their child. However, we will see later in this series that actually they might not have done quite as well as they should have, and there are still rather significant holes in this area of the law. And I mentioned the previous traditional view of the mother as a homemaker, father as the bread maker. This area of law, the reconciliation of work and family life, allows for greater equality between mothers and fathers for the reasons I've just given. And so it's not that fathers and men, you go to work, mothers, women, you stay at home. It's much more evenly distributed now, which is what the plan is. Plus, it encourages both partners in a relationship to contribute to the economy, which is always positive for particularly the leaders in the country, and there's less reliance on state resources then. And it also helps with tax, obviously, which then helps with the education system and so on. So yeah, by having two parents working, it encourages both to contribute to the economy rather than just the one. This is also very advantageous to employers, because, for instance, they do not need to retrain someone else. So, if a woman gets pregnant and she goes on maternity leave, then depending on the time she takes off, and we will look at this in a few episodes' time, then she can expect to go back to the job she had, and so they will have the same person there. However, if it was under the traditional setting that once the mother had a child, she wouldn't go back to work, that means employers would then have to hire someone else and then retrain that person to the standard they trained the mother. And so by having the mothers come back to work and supporting their return, it's ultimately saving employers money because they no longer need to retrain someone else entirely. They can just have the same person come back and continue their job as they were before they went on maternity leave. Also, the concept of the family has dramatically changed, and this is something I discuss a lot in my family law series, and so if you are interested in this area, I would strongly encourage you to go and give a listen to my family law part of this podcast. But, as I say, the concept of family has dramatically changed, and so it is no longer the case that the mother stays at home, the father goes off to work. Well, that's just one example of how families have changed, but that's not the only one, and there's now more diverse relationships, legal, social, and otherwise. There's homosexual relationships. The list goes on and on and on. So now let's move on and discuss some of the policy for this area of law. And I'm going to start by reading out a section of the Employment Rights Green Paper, which was entitled A New Deal for Working People. And this was essentially the Green Paper for the Employment Rights Act 2025, which came into law in December 2025 and is having a phased introduction, so it's not all coming in at once. Different parts of that act will be coming in at different times. But the Labour Green Party say, open quote, Labour believes the vision outlined in this Green Paper will make Britain the best place to work, where working people are able to enjoy dignity and respect in their jobs whilst living fulfilled lives outside of their work. Now is a moment of change in our country. We want to build a Britain where people in every part of our country, regardless of their background, can get good quality jobs that are a source of pride, provide security, treat workers fairly, and pay a proper wage to live a good life on. And so this statement is actually saying rather a lot. So the ultimate plan of the Labour government is to make Britain the best place to work, which, as we will see as we go through the employment law topic as a whole, some people might question this, especially when we get to collective employment law. But that's another topic altogether. But that's what we're working towards, and by allowing people to enjoy dignity and respect in their jobs, this should help them feel more fulfilled in their lives, both inside and outside of work, and hopefully encourage them, develop their motivation to continue to do the very best in their jobs. And they also want good quality jobs to be a source of pride, as well as providing security and treat workers fairly. And this is particularly important with how, for many people, they will spend the vast majority of their lives actually working, and so having a good source of income and being able to enjoy your job is very important. And pay a proper wage to live on. However, that can be problematic, as recent times have shown us in this cost of living crisis, which we're currently living in. And so it will be interesting to see how the Labour Party adapt to that, and future political parties. I know at the time of speaking, the 1st of March, there's obviously going to be increases in the national minimum wage and national living wage in April, but we'll have to see how much of an impact that actually has. So, why is reconciliation important? And this is really a two-way thing. For the mother, reconciliation is important because it allows for greater gender equality. And for the father, reconciliation is important because it allows the father to help bring up the children. And this all comes back to what I was previously saying about how this moves away from the traditional approach of fathers as the breadwinner, them going out to earn a living to look after their families, and the wife, mother, and female lady as the homemaker who would do the housework, do the cooking, and look after the children. And reconciliation essentially encourages both men and women to share parenting and employment responsibilities. And so rather than having that strict divide, which we've seen back in the past, it allows both the mother and father to form a connection, to form an attachment with their newborn child, or might not even be newborn, but their child, shall we say, as well as encouraging an equal contribution, i.e. both the mother and father will have their equal share of housework, for instance. And it's this principle which tries to aim towards greater equality between both mothers and fathers. However, when we look at maternity pay and also paternity pay, as well as maternity leave and paternity leave, we will see that actually this idea of there being greater equality between the mother and father as a result of reconciliation of work and family lives is actually a bit questionable, and actually it may not be doing what it was intended to do as well. But reconciliation is also very important for business interests. So, for instance, the reasons I've previously mentioned, it allows businesses to save money because they're not having to recruit someone new and train them up, and it encourages greater working relationships as well. If a business treats their employees properly, if they treat their employees well, those employees will be much more likely to put in all the extra effort they need in the business, as it will help form a positive working environment. But it's also in societal interests as well to see greater equality, and also if both mother and father can work, then they should work, and then that will mean there's more money in the public pot to allow for things like education, justice, and even social welfare benefits as well, which is probably one of the main arguments of why both parents work in, and why the reconciliation of work and family life is important and in the societal interests. Furthermore, this whole idea of reconciliation of both the mother and father contributing to the upbringing of a child very much reflects psychological research on the development of children. And this is very much the area of developmental psychology, which I'm going on to now. And most importantly, developmental psychology has emphasised the importance of both parents, i.e. both the mother and the father. And it's the idea that both the mother and father have different but equally important parenting roles, and so it's important for both of them do have a meaningful relationship with their children, because psychological research has shown that where one parent has been absent, that can have a detrimental impact on their children, it has been seen. For instance, we see such things in institutionalised children, based on the research of John Bowlby. But this isn't a psychology podcast, this is a legal podcast, so I won't go too much off topic. But as I was saying, both the mother and the father have different but equally important parenting roles. The mother, on the one hand, has, according to developmental psychology, a much more caring, nurturing role. So they are there to comfort the child, care for them, nurture them. This is often seen from the mother's early attachment to the child through breastfeeding, it may be. The mother is the one who obviously gives birth to the child, which obviously brings about the caring and nurturing qualities, largely due to hormonal release. For instance, oxytocin, the love hormone. However, on the other hand, the father isn't really there, according to psychology, for caring and nurturing, but is there for playful and adventurous play. The father is often seen as the fun, playful, daring one, and it encourages the child to be playful and step outside of their comfort zone, which is important for later life as well. And we can see from other psychological research, which we won't be discussing in much depth today, but we can see from other psychological research that having both parents in your life have really positive impacts in adult life, because early child attachments do have an impact on later adult life. So I'm now going to go into a bit of psychological research on the role of the father, because this is an area which has often been under-researched, often a neglected area of psychological research, and so I'm going to actually go through some of the research which has taken place. And looking at the dates on my screen in my notes, it's interesting because much of this research is actually very old, at least for me, and so it might be time that we need new, up-to-date research on the role of the father, because as society has changed and has moved away from has hopefully moved away from the idea of father as breadwinner, mother as homemaker, maybe the role of the father has actually changed as well. And so I will start with the research by Shaffer and Emerson in 1964. And essentially they found that fathers are not the first attachment figures, but they do play an important role. So Shaffer and Emerson essentially find that a father does not specifically refer to this is another important point actually, which I forgot to say. This isn't what Shaffer and Emerson say, but a father does not necessarily refer to the baby's particular biological male parent, as it refers to a child's closest male caregiver. And so this is about what men may contribute as caregivers rather than the biological father themselves. And this is particularly important with all the laws around parenting and parentage, which again, if you're interested in this area, do check out my podcasts and lectures on family law, where I discuss this in much more depth. But essentially, the legal and social parents, mothers and fathers, can all be different, and it's actually a rather complex area of law, so I won't go into any more detail here for employment law. But if you are interested, please do check out my family law episodes. But anyway, going back to Shaffer and Emerson, available evidence does suggest that fathers are much less likely to become babies' first attachment figures compared to mothers. And that was essentially the starting point of the Shaffer and Emerson research. And Shaffer and Emerson in 1964 found that the majority of babies first became attached to their mothers at around 7 months. In only 3% of cases, the father was the first sole object of attachment, and in 27% of cases, the father was the joint first object of attachment with the mother. However, it does appear, according to this research, that most fathers go on to become important attachment figures. For instance, 75% of the babies studied by Shaffer and Emerson formed an attachment with their fathers by the age of 18 months, and this was determined by the fact that the babies protested when their fathers walked away, which is a sign of attachment. And this is particularly shown by Ainsworth's strange situation experiment, which is a way of assessing attachment type, but that is well beyond the scope of employment law. Now, another researcher, a bit of a later researcher, was Grossman et al. In 2002, where essentially it was the idea that attachment to fathers is less important than attachment to mothers. However, fathers have a role in the quality of adolescent attachments, and so this really re-emphasises the role that fathers have different roles from mothers, but are still rather important. So, Grossman et al. 2002 carried out a longitudinal study where babies' attachments were studied until they were in their teens. The researchers then looked at both parents and behaviour and its relationship to the quality of their babies' later attachments to other people. And essentially, the quality of a baby's attachment with mothers but not fathers was related to attachment in adolescence. So this suggested that attachment to fathers is less important than attachment to mothers. However, Grossman et al. Also found that the quality of fathers' play with babies was related to the quality of adolescent attachments. So, as I previously mentioned, this suggests that fathers have a different role from mothers, and one that is more to do with play and stimulation and less to do with emotional development. And so you can see how both mother and father have equally important but different roles in the upbringing of children, of babies in particular. So there is evidence that men are indeed less sensitive to infant cues than mothers. However, Frody et al. In 1978 showed videotapes of infants crying, and they found no differences in the physiological responses of men and women. And so nevertheless, men do and can form secure attachments with children, as in the case of single male parent families. But Frank et al. 1997 found that in two-parent families where the father is the primary caregiver, both parents often share the same role of primary attachment figure. So essentially, men can be primary attachment figures, but biological and social factors may discourage this. And so, as I mentioned at the outset of speaking about these studies, these are very old. For instance, Frody et al. Mentioned how Frody et al. Did their research in 1978 and 1997 respectfully, and this is where the traditional distinction between mothers and fathers were much more apparent still. So maybe now that we have this law on the reconciliation of work and family life, it might be that social factors do encourage more equal and parenting much more as well. And then Geiger in 1996 again found that fathers are more playful, physically active and challengers. So fathers do have a role to play as important secondary attachment figures essentially. And Geiger in 1996 found that fathers are more playful, physically active and generally better at providing challenging situations for their children. And to be able to provide challenging situations for children and helping them to develop their resilience and approach these challenges in a positive way is vitally important for life and development. But a father is essentially an exciting playmate, whereas mothers are more conventional and tend to read stories to their children. And other research, though, for instance, White and Willett in 1992, found that it may be that a lack of sensitivity from fathers can be seen as positive because it fosters problem solving by making greater communicative and cognitive demands on children. And so that is just an overview of how different attachment figures, i.e. mothers and fathers, can help develop the children in different ways, according to psychology. And it might be, because much of this research is very old, it might be this has changed, and if so, then I'm sure this can very much be praised due to the reconciliation of work and family life. And so you can see some of the research which may have influenced the policy making in this area. And so, talking about influences, influencing this policy, what actually influences employers to be family friendly? Well, for one, it does reflect good industrial practice, because having family friendly rights, it makes the employer be viewed in a more positive light in terms of supporting its employees, and it could also be seen that employers have a duty to society to encourage both parents to look after their children. And this all comes back to benefiting employees because they can spend more time as a family in the early stages of their child's life. It also promotes loyalty and rapport in the workplace, and this is something I mentioned earlier. If the employers are going to be supportive of new families with new baby children, then that's going to build that loyalty and rapport, and as a result the employee is more likely to continue working hard in their job. And I think most importantly, it goes beyond financial advantages. When it comes to early families, it's not all going to be financial advantages, but there is going to be a significant emotional advantage as well, especially in the early period of your newborn child. And then also it suggests that the employees are appreciated and personally wanted, which, as I argue, leads to better workload. And so these are just four influences of why employers might want to try and be family friendly. And I'm sure there's many, many more as well. But I'm now going to go on to look at the timeline of the development of family friendly rights in the UK. And so, pre-1997, it was essentially the responsibility of adult family members to decide how to divide responsibilities themselves. And so, even though it may have been a private decision between adult family members, obviously societal views would have influenced these judgments. And so, pre-1997, it was very much the father goes to work, the mother stays at home to care for the children. However, in between 1997 and 2010, we had the Work and Families Act of 2006 come about, and that was really the first major bit of legislation which provided for family-friendly rights, including the various kinds of leave which we will be looking at throughout this series of podcast episodes on the reconciliation of work and family life. But then the Children and Families Act of 2014 was introduced, and that's been a major piece of legislation in so many different ways, as it amended many really big influential acts of Parliament. For instance, the Children Act of 1989, the Human Fertilisation Embryology Act, to name just a few. And it obviously amends the Employment Rights Act as well and provides for more family-friendly rights. And then in 2015, even more flexibility was introduced as well. And most recently, the Employment Rights Act 2025 also provides for more freedom and really helps develop the family-friendly rights in the UK yet again. So now, what are the key areas of family-friendly rights provisions? There's 5 key provisions in this area of family-friendly rights. They are health and safety, leave, pay, time off, and flexible working arrangements. So health and safety is very much related to maternity leave, because at least for the first 2 weeks, maternity leave is largely a health and safety measure. But we're also going to be looking at different types of maternity leave, different types of leave more generally, the types of pay which is available, whether employees can ask for time off for family reasons, and see how flexible working arrangements actually work in practice as well. So we're going to look at all of these areas over the course of the next few episodes. But that concludes this episode, and so just to recap what I've been through today, I've explained the importance of reconciliation of work and family life and how it encourages both parents with new children to both take an active process and for them both to go back into employment. I've also described in some detail the psychological justifications for shared childcare, so how important it is for the child, at least in psychological, developmental, psychological reasons, for the child to be attached to both their mother and father. And I've explained briefly the development of family-friendly rights in the UK. And we will be picking up on the development of family-friendly rights in the UK as well throughout this series of lectures. So I hope this has been useful. I hope you have enjoyed this. If you do have any questions, please do reach out to me. You should be able to comment on this podcast, or even go on to my YouTube channel if you're not there already, and write me a comment there, and I will do my best to respond. I try and respond to every comment which I get. Please do follow this podcast to get more content like this, and please do share my podcast with others who may be interested. Do check out my YouTube channel as well, Law with Charlie, and please be sure to like, comment and subscribe there so you never miss any of my content, because both on my podcast and my YouTube channel, although I do lots of similar stuff, there are lots of different things as well which I only do on my podcast. And most importantly, support me. If you look at my description box below, whether on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, there will be ways for you to support me and my mission through various crowdfunding initiatives. But that essentially concludes this episode today. I again hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking to you next time in my next area of law for the next Law with Charlie podcast episode. So thank you very much and have a good day. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Law with Charlie, with your host, Charlie Medcalf. Please do ensure that you leave a comment below, either to just say hello or ask a question. And please like, subscribe, and leave a review for more content like this. See you next time.